The last place I thought I'd be filing a police report was in a quiet lakeside cabin, tucked deep inside the Briar Ridge HOA development, 2 hours from any real city trouble. I moved here for peace, or maybe to protect my son, Jake, after the last 2 years of grief and chaos. His mother's death hadn't been easy on either of us. This cabin, this HOA-controlled community, promised structure, calm, and a fresh start. That was until the night someone kicked in our front door and nearly got themselves killed. It was 1:03 a.m., to be exact. I remember because I looked at my phone right after Jake pulled the trigger. Earlier that day, we'd had an argument with a man who claimed to be part of the HOA New Safety Enforcement Patrol. His name was Greg Mullen, tall, cocky, probably mid-40s, wore mirrored sunglasses and a tactical vest with a badge that said Briar Ridge Security Coordinator. The thing was, the HOA board never mentioned any new security hires in the last meeting, and his badge looked weird, thin plastic, too shiny. He knocked on our door around noon, said he was doing routine inspections of the cabins near the lake, said ours looked noncompliant. I asked what that meant. He pointed to the small fire pit out back and the color of our mailbox. I'm afraid your cabin's paint scheme doesn't match HOA Code 14B, and backyard flame sources require permits, he said with fake politeness that crawled under my skin. Jake watched from behind the screen door, gripping his late mother's dog tags, his new habit when nervous. I told Mullen I'd review the bylaws and get back to him, and I shut the door before he could say anything else. I didn't know then that we were being watched. At 1:03 a.m., Jake and I were asleep in separate rooms. I'd forgotten to lock the bottom bolt on the front door, not something I normally miss. But I had, and the door exploded open like something out of a war movie. Sat up in bed, adrenaline roaring before I could understand what I was hearing. Glass shattered in the living room. Jake screamed my name, and then bang. A single gunshot echoed through the cabin, then silence. I bolted into the hallway in just my boxers. Jake stood in front of the entryway, barefoot on the hardwood, holding the revolver I kept locked in my bedroom drawer. The drawer had been unlocked. On the floor just past the doorframe lay Greg Mullen, or whoever the hell he really was, bleeding from the shoulder and gasping in shock. His cheap tactical vest had a hole ripped through the front. His badge lay beside him, a toy I later found out, bought online for $12.99. Jake was frozen, his eyes wide and tearful. His hands shook violently. I took the gun from him slowly. He didn't resist. We called 911. It took the sheriff's department almost 40 minutes to arrive. During that time, Mullen bled and begged. Said he thought we were harboring something illegal. Said we didn't respect order. And that citizens who ignore structure deserve to be shown how fragile their walls really are. I kept pressure on his wound but refused to say a word to him. Sheriff Mathers arrived with 2 deputies, and what followed felt like something out of a movie script. Turns out Mullen wasn't part of any HOA security team. He wasn't a cop. He wasn't even a resident of Briar Ridge. He'd been squatting in one of the foreclosed cabins up the hill, using HOA meeting notes left behind by previous tenants to fabricate some absurd vigilante role. He'd printed fake citations and tried to enforce his own rules, targeting families who seemed nonconforming. I like when people fall in line, he muttered from the back of the ambulance as they cuffed him to the gurney. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. Sheriff Mathers told me that Jake's shot likely saved our lives. Mullen wasn't just there to intimidate. Found in his backpack were flex, cuffs, duct tape, a box cutter, and a printed map of our cabin with our names on it. Jake didn't sleep for 2 nights after that. Neither did I. The HOA, for their part, scrambled to explain how someone could impersonate a security officer for weeks. Several residents admitted they'd seen Mullen before and assumed he was official. He spoke with such conviction, wore the right kind of gear, and carried a clipboard. The board president, Janet Holt, issued an emergency HOA bulletin stating that no security team had ever been approved or hired. He operated in the gaps, she said, voice shaky at the emergency town hall meeting. Gaps we now know must be closed immediately. But even with those words I felt no peace. Jake changed after that night. He grew quiet, withdrawn. For days he didn't touch his Xbox, didn't text his friends, didn't even listen to music. I tried everything, talking, distracting, offering him projects, but he'd just stare at the door. Every creak of the floorboards at night made him flinch. Then, one evening, I found him sitting at the back of the cabin near the fire pit the one Mullen had said was non-compliant. He was holding the revolver again, unloaded, turning it slowly in his hands. "I didn't want to do it," he said without looking up. "I just didn't want to lose you too." I sat down beside him, wordless for a moment. Then I took the gun gently from his hands and set it in the dirt. "You protected this family," I said, "but it's not your job to carry that weight alone. That's mine." He nodded, then finally leaned into my shoulder and let the tears come. A few weeks later, Jake started attending counseling. Sheriff Mathers put him in touch with a local therapist who specializes in trauma cases involving kids. I went too. We talked about the night. Over and over. We rebuilt trust slowly, brick by brick. Mullen pled guilty to multiple counts of impersonating an officer, breaking and entering, and attempted kidnapping. He won't see daylight for decades. That, at least, brought some closure. The HOA implemented strict new protocols. No one could show up on your doorstep without an official, registered HOA badge now, and those badges had holograms and QR code verification. But the damage was already done. The trust was broken. Neighbors looked at each other differently. For sale signs began popping up faster than summer weeds. We stayed, not because we weren't afraid we were, but because I refused to let fear dictate our lives. We rebuilt the door, repainted the mailbox. I even applied for the flame permit. Jake eventually laughed again, played again, and one night, months later, while we roasted marshmallows at the fire pit, he asked if we could go hiking again. Just like before. I nodded, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we were safe.